right? I'm not just an object that's acted upon by external causes. I'm a subject, and from my subjectivity, I choose. So that dimension of choice clarifies my essence. The clarification of my essence, that transformation, right? Clarification through transformation, where I become the most beautiful, gorgeous, true, good, wondrous, poetic, prose version of myself. That is the purpose of my life, that transformation. That transformation does not complete in one lifetime. And because the world, the universe loves me madly, the personhood, the infinite, intimate person of cosmos loves me madly, so it is actually an axiom. It's an axiom of cosmos that there should be reincarnation. Welcome, everyone. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. We're talking about reincarnation today. Is that crazy? That is crazy. That is crazy. So we're talking about reincarnation today, but I want to, if I can, set the context. Is that okay, everybody? I want to set the context in a bunch of ways. God. And this room is one of the rooms in the center, right, at the Center for World Philosophy and Religion. And it's like a battleship. And anyone who's been here, that the entire first floor, which is the major floor of this old Victorian, is covered with books, floor to ceiling, each covering a different dimension of space and time. And this is like our battle star, our little battleship, taking on the Death Star, right? Looking for that direct hit, which actually can explode a culture of death and actually step into a culture of life. And at the very core, the direct hit, and for those of you who are not familiar, I apologize slightly insincerely for the Star Wars analogy, right? The direct hit of the Death Star, if anyone wants to put it in the chat box, of course, is in episode 6, 4, 5, 6, which was the third Star Wars movie made, right? Because they did 4, 5, 6. Then we went back to the prequel, which was 1, 2, 3, right? The kind of birth of Anakin Skywalker and ultimately his transformation to Darth Vader in episode 3, which is the 6th movie made. So it was originally, we did 4, 5, and 6, then 1, 2, and 3, and then they did 7, 8, and 9 with more Star Wars to come. But it is that and Harry Potter are the two most watched stories in world culture, and they're worth noticing. And so the sense of the Death Star can be taken down. And even if you don't have firepower or technology or funding that is equal to the Death Star, you can take the Death Star down. How? There's a way in which we can score, right, this kind of, right, direct hit. There's a direct hit, right? Does that make sense, everyone? So the direct hit is, what's the direct hit? What's the direct hit that actually changes everything, that actually moves, shifts, and transforms the entire thing? What's the direct hit? Anyone give it to me in the chat box. A new story of what? Thank you. A new story of value. And that is not and I think everyone gets that. That's not a declarative sentence. It's not a declaration. It's not a dogmatic sentence. That is an empirical sentence, which is grounded in both the interior and the exterior sciences, that it actually is a new story of value that changes the course of history. And that new story of value in the end generates new techno-economic structures and new techno-economic bases and new forms of governance and new ways of looking at the world from first person to second person to third person perspectives on the world. And my dear friend and beloved co-founder of the center, Ken Wilber, has talked about fourth, fifth, and sixth person perspectives on the world in very beautiful ways. But it's a new story of value. And paradoxically, that's what we're here to do. We're here in this time between worlds, which is Zach Stein's phrase, my close student and friend and colleague, or what I call my phrase, a time between stories. In this time between worlds and this time between stories, right, we actually understand that we are for the first time stepped into a new identity. right? We're actually moving at this time of breakdown, this time of emergency. There's also emergence. There's also breakthrough. And of course, the nature of the intimate universe is that the emergency and the emergence converge together, right? The breakdown and the potential breakthrough emerge together. And the breakthrough is a breakthrough in our fundamental identity. It's actually an evolution of self. It's an evolution of self. We begin to realize that we're not merely Homo sapien. We're not merely separate self Homo sapien who is able to do certain rational constructs, right, of wisdom, right? But that wisdom is ultimately contrived and ultimately pointless because modernity claimed that wisdom in general and value in general was contrived, that the world is ultimately, as one Nobel Prize winner, right, who was very good at muons and very bad at the rest of thought, right? The world, the claim is pointless, right? It's a pointless world in which wisdom is contrived. Wisdom supports this mechanical goal of survival, right? Which was, right, Homo sapien, right? The Homo who is wise, but wisdom in modernity and postmodernity's understanding as essentially a made-up category, or as one writer called, right, wisdom, right, a figment of our imagination, a fiction, or a social construct. And we're actually realizing that's not the case. That's not the case. It's deep, right? It's not the case. No, actually, a deep cracking through of value theory and a reformulating of value theory. And anyone who's new here, we're in the source code here. We're not on the desktop. It's not about declaration. It's not about desktop. This is not about easy listening. It's about the deep, the longer way, which is the shorter way, doing the deep and hard and beautiful and gorgeous and ecstatic work of articulating a new story of value based on revisioning the essential source code of consciousness and culture. I had an argument maybe 15 years ago with a woman named Tammy Simon, who's a successful publisher of New Age thought. And Tammy was quite upset when I was using the word source code. You can't talk about evolving the source code, right? There is no source code. Source code means there's something inherent and definitive, right? And she was formed by a kind of postmodern culture. And we had several conversations where she said, I don't like, we can't use the word source code. That's not correct. There is a source code. And there is inherent value. And that source code is the very nature of reality itself. It is the ground out of which everything arises. And the ground is not merely the ground of being, it's a ground of value. Right? If it's a ground of being, you can rationalize any kind of outburst and any kind of spontaneous age regression and any kind of violation of value. You put it away in your power structure and you move on. No, the ground up, but if there's a real ground of value, if there's a rightness to cosmos, I'm held accountable by that rightness. The story of cosmos is a story of the evolution of rightness. It's the evolution of value, but the ground of value is real. There's a rightness to things, right? There's a value to things. There's a validity to value. And our valiance and our valor is based on our deep connection to value. And value is, right? Value is implicit in the field of cosmos, which is a field of valentius, a field of love, right? Because love itself is value. Love is the love of life. And life is value. Life is a value of cosmos. Love is the love of goodness, and goodness is a value of cosmos. And love is the love of heroism, right? Which is my willingness to feel the whole and sacrifice for the whole. And heroism is a value of cosmos. And love is a love of truth. And truth is a value of cosmos, right? And love is a love of beauty in its deepest sense, not in its surface tinsel sense. And beauty is a value of cosmos. And love is a love of love, right? And love is a love of the clarified desire that animates me, and desire is a value of cosmos. Does that make sense, everyone? So there's a field of Eros value. And the realization that there's a field of Eros value, that's where we live. Where do we live in a field of Eros value? And who are we? We are unique incarnations of that field of Eros value that lives in us, as us, and through us. So we're not merely Homo sapien. Fill in the sentence for me, anybody. We're not merely Homo sapien, we are Homo Amor. There's an evolution of self, right? There's an evolution of self, right? When our dear friend wrote his great book called Sources of Self, one of the most important books written in the 20th century, he got to self into the 20th century. But there's an evolution of self. The evolution of self is, right, the evolution of love, is the evolution of Eros value. There's an evolution of self. Self is not static. Our understanding, our clarification of who we are evolves through our lives personally and evolves through the life world collectively. Does that make sense? There's an evolution of self. Who gets that? That's not a fantasy. That's not contrived. That's the nature of reality. Myself and who I am, my sense, my identity evolves. There's a transformation of identity. Evolution is a series of transformations, and the major transformation at the very center of evolution is what? Is a transformation of what? Of identity. So you get that each sentence is critical, right? We're laying down source code. There's an evolution of the source code. The source code of reality is the simple first rules of reality. And the simple first rules are the source code. The source code is where am I? Who am I? And what ought I do? Those are the three great questions of life. We call them the three great questions of CosmoErotic humanism. So an evolution of the source code, it's not just a desktop moving stuff around on the desktop. We're not just moving around deck chairs, right, on the Titanic, on the desktop, right? We're not just moving icons around. We're in the source code. The source code is the deepest and best answer to where am I, who am I, and what ought I do, right? So who am I? I'm no longer Homo sapien. I'm no longer a Homo who possesses incidental wisdom geared towards mechanistic survival. Now, that's not me. I'm something much deeper, right? I am Homo Amor. I am the field of value in person. I am the field of Eros value in person. I am the Amorous Cosmos in person. I am the CosmoErotic universe in person. I am the intimate universe in person. I am evolution, the love story of the universe in person. I am the universe, a love story in person. Right? All different ways of saying the same thing. Does that make sense, everyone? And that new story of value, I used to call it a cosmic humanism 10, 15 years ago. We now call it CosmoErotic humanism. Right? It's a humanism that emerges from the realization that the whole resides in me and I'm in relationship to the whole. And every personal move I make is cosmic. We don't bypass the personal like classical Enlightenment theory. No, we expand into the wider field of Eros value. And then we go from separate self into true self, the widest field of Eros value. And then we individuate from true self on the other side in the personal that's beyond the impersonal, which is unique self, which is my unique incarnation of the amorous I am Homo Amor. Okay? Wow. And that is a new story of value. That's a new story of value. Does that make sense, everyone? That's a new story of value. And that is a new story of value, which is the only structure in the very fabric of reality that has the capacity to respond to the meta crisis. Because the meta crisis at its core is a failure of story. It's a failure of narrative, but not narrative in the postmodern sense, a made up story, but actually the actual narrative arc of cosmos, right? And it is breathtaking, literally. And we're doing this at a time, and I said to my dear, right, friend, colleague, and deep lineage holder, Zach Stein, yesterday, we were talking yesterday, and I said, this is not exhilarating, it's terrifying. And of course, terrifying and exhilarating sometimes come together, don't they? But it's terrifying. We're holding, right, every sentence I just spoke, there's pages written on, footnotes written on, either volumes written or volumes unwritten, or, right, we're in the middle of enacting this great library, this Da Vinci great library, because we are, again, like in the Renaissance, at a time between worlds and a time between stories. The Renaissance faced, plague, which destroyed half of Europe and parts of Asia, but ultimately couldn't destroy the world. We're facing a list of 10 existential risks, right, which have the capacity to literally destroy either humanity itself, what we've called the death of humanity, or the death of our humanity, right? Or the very nature of what it means to be a human being. And so we're enacting, right, this new story based on integrating the best strands of validated insight, right, from every stream of wisdom in the traditional, modern, and postmodern period, weaving them together, right, into this new story of value that we want to download into the source code of culture. And it's not an American story, and it's not a Dutch story. It's not a Belgian story, and it's not a Canadian story. And no, Mr. Trump, Canada is not the 51st state. Relax, buddy, right? It's not a Canadian story. It's not an African story, although it's all of those. We need Africa, and we need Asia, and we need Antarctica, and we need New Zealand, and we need Europe, right? We need the whole thing. We need Asia, right? We need the Americas, South and North, right? We need all of it. But this is a story of value that's inherent in the source code of the whole thing. And it's not this move we're making for career reasons. We're not making a career out of this. I, for example, don't take a salary. Bad career, as my mother has pointed out to me on multiple occasions. We're actually coming together, as has often happened at key moments in history, right? We're coming together in the form of a fictional figure who is not less than life, but larger than life, a pseudo anonymous collective authorship that we're calling David J. Temple. That we're calling David J. Temple. Does that make sense? David J. Temple. And David J. Temple, like, for example, in the Solomon lineage of Hebrew wisdom, in the 13th century, the Zohar, the Book of Radiance, which redefines the Renaissance, is articulated by a figure named Shimon, son of Yochai, Shimon Bar Yochai. But Shimon Bar Yochai, right? Shimon Bar Yochai, and Shimon Bar Yochai is this collective authorship. Okay, does that make sense? Does everyone get that? Who's got that so far? Who's got that so far? The whole point is not to talk about reincarnation. Anything we're going to say about reincarnation, got this, everybody? Anything we're going to say about reincarnation is in this context. So we're going to talk about reincarnation today, but the context is everything. Does that make sense, everybody? So this is the context. The context is we are enacting a new story of value in response to the meta crisis, right? We are going to talk about reincarnation, but we're going to talk about reincarnation in this direct context. That's the point, right? That's the point, love. Does that make sense, love? So in other words, what I want to do now is today, with permission, everyone, is I want to add some dimensions to Homo Amor. Angus has been asking, right, about talking about Israel for the last, more than 6 months. And I have. It's not that I've avoided talking about Israel, right? It's that Israel is such an important and complex topic that I'm trying to think of, like, when I should talk about it and how much needs to be said. You can't really do it in an hour, right? You can't really talk about Israel without a much larger story, which is the story of Orientalism and the story of the Hebrew wisdom story and the Arab story. And it's a much bigger story. And then from that story, you can talk about what's happening in Gaza right now. And what's happening in Gaza right now, you've got to actually be able to get your sources straight, and that's who's reporting what's happening, because the level of disinformation about what's happening in Gaza right now is unimaginable. And it's difficult to imagine the pain of Gaza, right? It's difficult to imagine the pain of Hamas holding a huge amount of the Gazan citizenship hostage, right? The utter destruction of any kind of beautiful, moderate emergence in Gaza that Hamas has perpetrated. It's also hard to imagine the fundamental source code culture in Gaza, right? That I would say the surface source code culture that is not in anything that we would recognize in terms of universal human values. And it's just hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. So the one thing I will say, Angus, for you is that here's what's clear. What's clear is every human being is created homo imago Dei, and every cry of every German child killed during World War II, every Arab child killed in Gaza, every Israeli, right? Everyone's blood is equally red before God, right? That is absolutely true and absolutely painful beyond imagination, right? And there's not a moral equivalence in Gaza, and Israel is not committing genocide, not even close, right? That's not what's happening. And, right, there's a tragedy beyond imagination. So it's like, right? It's like, right? It's hard. It's hard. It's a hard, and I will, Angus, I will keep my promise. And Gaza rips my heart out every single day. So it's not that I've forgotten about it, my friend. It's that it's so painful and so deep and so profound that, and it takes so much to talk about. So Angus, I actually, teasing aside, I appreciate you holding that for us, right? In the deep way that you do, and just loving and honoring you beyond imagination. Okay. So We're going to talk about reincarnation today. And we're going to talk about reincarnation in the context of Homo Amor. We're going to talk about this in the context of Homo Amor. Because one of the things that I would like to do over the course of this coming year is kind of speak to some of the sources of CosmoErotic humanism, particularly as they appear. There are many sources. Complexity theory is a very important source of CosmoErotic humanism. Chaos theory, obviously, one of the original systems theory, a very important source of CosmoErotic humanism. Particular strains in Abhinavagupta's Kashmir Shaivism, right, is very important to CosmoErotic humanism. Molecular biology is essential to CosmoErotic humanism. Mary Magdalene traditions are essential to CosmoErotic humanism, but at the core of the core of the core of the core, there's something that's called the Solomon lineage. It's how I refer to it, the Solomon lineage, which actually originates with Solomon, with the ancient Solomon and the ancient king in Jerusalem. And I've spent much of my life involved in the Solomon lineage. I spend hundreds of hours at the Oxford Library tracing Aramaic texts within that lineage. And the Solomon lineage is a very essential background, right, and occasionally foreground, right, but essential ground of CosmoErotic humanism. And so I'd like to talk about dimensions of the original grounding of CosmoErotic humanism as we articulate the new source code structures. And as we move full speed ahead and articulate the new source code structures, I also want to talk about particular pieces that need to be brought to bear. Okay? Does that make sense, everyone? So at the core of CosmoErotic humanism is this very essential realization of we're in a field of Eros value, right? The universe it's the universe : a love story. Okay, stay close, everyone, okay? Stay close. Okay, it's the universe : a love story. Okay, like, does everyone get that? It's like, the universe : a love story. Now, the universal love story is not just a global love story. It's not just that the love story between separate self-humans or human beings who experience themselves as separate selves, right? It's not just that, okay, it's really love exists between separate self-human beings, and in a metaphoric, poetic way, we're going to call the universal love story. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that reality is a love story, and the feeling of Eros love, the feeling of Eros value, right, is an interior that runs through all of cosmos. And I stand 1,000% in what I've called pan-interiority, right? The sense of pan-interiority, that reality is exteriors and interiors at very different levels, right? All the way up and all the way down, right? Obviously, the interior of a single molecule is different than the interior of a full-fledged human being, which is why we date human beings and don't date molecules, right? A stone, right, is made up of molecular structures, and the molecular structures have a proto consciousness, not a consciousness, a proto consciousness, a proto interiority, right? But of course, you wouldn't date a stone, nor would you go to prison for breaking a stone in half. So there's continuity and discontinuity in the evolutionary chain, from matter to life to mind, all the way up the chain and all the way down the chain. But at the core, there's a field of feeling. Reality is driven or animated or drawn forward by this series of transformations, and the transformations are lured. There's a lure of value in cosmos. There's an allurement to ever deeper and ever higher value, and value is always erotic value, Eros value, the value of ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. And that's that movement of cosmos, which goes through a first Big Bang, which is matter, and a second Big Bang, which is life, the biosphere, and a third Big Bang, which is the depth of human self-reflectivity, right? Then goes to a fourth Big Bang. And what we've called the fourth Big Bang is the emergence of Homo Amor, is the emergence of this new human and new humanity who has a different relationship to all of life, but not just to all of life on Earth, but it's a new relationship to the galaxies, to the billions, the hundreds of billions of galaxies, the billions and billions of galaxies that move throughout the cosmos. We have a different relationship to the whole. We have a galactic relationship, and we have a relationship to the universe. We have a relationship to everything that goes all through time and beneath time and after time. Like, we're related to the whole thing. right? We actually feel the whole incepted in us, and we're related to the whole, right? So our story, our love story, is not a global love story of separate selves on this particular planet. It's that the universe is a love story, right? It's a galactic and then a universe love story. And for example, exo studies, our relationship to larger traces of life in cosmos, would be part of Homo Amor, right? Number one, right? Number two, right? Profoundly, right? It's not just that it's a love story in this dimension of existence. Does everyone got that? It's not just a love story in this dimension of existence, but there's a multi-dimensional reality. Reality has multi-dimensions. So it's not just that there's extra-terrestrial realities, extra-terrestia. There's not just other galaxies, extra-terrestrial, but there's extra-dimensional. There's multiple dimensions of reality. Does that make sense, everyone? So in these multiple dimensions of reality, that's all a love story. It's one fabric. It's not different fabrics. Does that make sense, everyone? So terrestrial means other terra, right? Earth, ground, other physical embodied, right, existences all through the galaxy. That's one. And then extra dimensional. So for example, dimensional would mean, right, let's say life after death. A life after death, right? Another world, another dimension, which exists in parallel with this dimension, that's extra dimensional. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. So to be Homo Amor, I can't just relate to Homo Amor, right, as a separate self-human being on an isolated planet called Earth and try and call it a love story based on some social constructs, which we call love. No, we're saying that Eros or Eros value or a movement towards value is a ground of the universe that appears in diverse forms, but there's a shared ground of value. There's a cosmological value that moves through cosmos, right? And when Mark Lupacella, right, wrote a book that in NASA, in a little department in NASA, that very deeply validates, right, this approach I've been trying to express to CosmoErotic humanism. And Lane and I are going to integrate part of chapter 6 and chapter 8 in Lupacella's work. And remember, Lena, we talked about that about 8 months ago. We had a little exchange on Lupacella. So Lupacella, writing at NASA, writes a book called Cosmological Theories of Value. Mark, with all due respect, a poorly written book, quite arcane, but if you actually get to the core of what Lupacella is saying, he's dead right. He's dead on. He's looking at the hard science, and he's trying to understand, is there a kind of set of scientific principles that are a ground to the entire cosmological field? And, right, he comes, right, to actually using utterly different language, the same conclusions I have reading the interior and exterior sciences, and the same conclusion that, if you will, our whole school of thought has come to. Okay. But so I can't think of, so he's talking about that from a cosmological scientific perspective, and he's particularly reading the implications of the relativity principle for what he's going to call the interconnectivity principle. So I'm not going to go there now. Okay, I'm not going to go there now. Bracket that. But so that's a cosmological set of what are the principles I can extract from the kind of scientific paradigms that are now reigning that didn't exist 200 years ago. That's what Lupacella is looking at. And that's important. And I'm going to integrate Lupacella's work in our universal love story work that we've written the core volumes. And Zohar, you did great work on them. And they're now in the hands of our master artist, right, Lena. And that set of volumes will hopefully emerge. But there's another dimension we have to add. And the other dimension we have to add is a much wider set of dimensions, right? In other words, part of Homo Amor has to be both galactic, extraterrestrial, and extra-dimensional. Right? Because Homo Amor doesn't end with death, right? And so in some sense, we need to very directly, right, insert the extra dimensional, right, dimension of reality, right, into our conversation. Without that, there's no Homo Amor. Does that make sense? Right? Without a galactic view and an extra dimensional view, we're actually not talking about Homo Amor. We're talking about a very narrow, separate self vision. So in order for Homo sapien to become Homo Amor, to become the universe a love story in person, right, I need this much wider vision, this much wider view, okay? So I'm going to start with a song. And this song is sung by one of my utterly favorite human beings, my favorite people that ever walked the planet Earth. I'm madly in love with them. I've been madly in love with them since he died. He died, God, a few decades ago, right? Harry Chapin. And the name of the song is All My Life's a Circle. So Harry Chapin, and listen to the words carefully. Harry Chapin, All My Life's a Circle, coming at you. Oh my God. All My Life's a Circle. Harry Chapin. So there's one key line there. Is that a great song, everybody? Is that a fantastic song? And I'm madly in love with this song. And I'm madly in love with this song. I've been madly in love with Harry Chapin for a few decades, and there's like four like of my favorite songs, and this is like it's an insanely, and the guy's a crazy beautiful guy. Okay, and there's a key line in the song, and when he sings the song, when he sings this version, did you catch it? I've got this funny feeling that I'll be here again. Did everyone catch that? Who caught that? Right, you got that? That's who caught that note? I got this funny feeling that I'll be here again. But the actual words of the song and the formal words, that's the way he sings it. I've got this funny feeling that we'll all be together again. So just feel that. And whenever he sings it, actually, right, in live concert, he would sing it on live concert. I went to hear him when I was 20, and it was just some of the most special time of my life. It was just this crazy, beautiful, right? His songs never got on the radio. And there's one song that got on the radio. Anyone remember what it was? Cats in the Cradle. Remember that song? Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon. Remember that? Little Boy Blue and the Man and the Moon. When that song got on the radio, right? About the father and the son, these incredibly beautiful ballads. And so this one is relatively short, right? This one. And I've got this funny feeling that we'll all be together again. And then basically wherever he sings it, the audience just goes, yes, because there's this intuitive recognition. Has everyone got that? There's this intuitive recognition. We've got this funny feeling, right, that we'll all be together again. There's this sense like, yes, something's happening. We'll all be together again. Meaning all my life's a circle, right? It's going to go around again. And actually, the lineage phrase for reincarnation, to reincarnate means I'm going to re-incarnate. Does that make sense? I'm going to reincarnate. And I'm going to incarnate in this world again. And it's critical, as I said earlier, to add reincarnation, to add exo studies, to add these dimensions, right? And really to add all of parapsychology, right? The entire world of mediumship. So, for example, I did a dialogue for the first time this year publicly with a man named Paul Selig, who's a professor at NYU, who is a medium. And everyone said to me, you're a serious philosopher. Why are you talking to a medium? And I responded to people like, why would you think that serious philosophy excludes mediumship? Right? That's a strange idea. Why would you think that? There's actually a very serious word, a very serious world, right? Which includes telepathy, which includes reincarnation, which includes out-of-body experience, which includes poltergeist, right? Which includes extra dimensions of multiple forms, which includes exo studies, right? How do we actually study the extraterrestrial world? What's the relationship to the extraterrestrial world, to the extra dimensional world? Now, of course, the question is, do we have valid information of any of this stuff? Okay, let's say, do we have valid information on any of this stuff? So the answer is, right, on a lot of it, we don't. Right? For most of history, we didn't have valid information that we could fully validate, right, on these issues. We had information, right? We had experience, we had direct experience, we had philosophical reasons to believe the information. We had direct experiences that we were able to validate, but we didn't have enough information to actually put together, you with me, everyone? To put together like a database, if you will, right? A cross-cultural gathering of experiences that could actually be checked against each other, and we could begin to articulate a very deep gnosis. And that's completely new. Does everyone get that? Right? And that actually the last 150 years has enacted the possibility of doing an entirely new form of research. an entirely new form of cross-cultural sharing, to be able to actually discern what is genuine information, what is quackery. And in the realm of parapsychology, there's been more rigorous gathering of information, probably than in any other realm of science, because there was so much fear of this realm of parapsychology being dismissed, right, by the sciences, right? The rigor in the experiments is actually shocking. And David Ray Griffin, the Whiteheadian scholar, points out in a number of his writings the utter rigor. Now, particularly 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. So again, my dear friend Ken Wilber, right? Ken and I have talked about reincarnation. We've talked about the exo world, right? We're completely aligned on it. And Ken, for example, left it out of Integral because he didn't want Integral to get dismissed based on people in a kind of superficial way saying, he's talking about reincarnation. He's talking about extraterrestrial or extra. No, let's not do that. So he left it out, which was a legitimate and perhaps important strategic move right at that time, but it's no longer a possibility. It now has to be integrated. So in CosmoErotic humanism, in this new meta theory, this new CosmoErotic humanism, we need to talk about it directly and clearly, right? And I want to try and do as follows. And we're going to spend the next couple of weeks talking about this a little bit, okay? And on and off through the year, we're going to come back to different dimensions of parapsychology. And one of the things I want to do, as I said at the very beginning, is integrate into Homo Amor some of these new dimensions, right? Even as we move forward with the core meta-theoretical structures of value is real and universal love story and unique self 2.0. And those are our core structures. That's what we're going to lead with. So now filling in here's some of the backstory. So let me just do as follows, okay? Let me give you an overarching sense of what we're going to do, and then do a very little tiny piece of it. And then we'll pick up from the part 2 next week. Is that fair? I want to draw this to a conclusion. I think we've set the ground in a really good way. So we're going to look at reincarnation. So the word for reincarnation in Hebrew, the original Hebrew, and it's also in Aramaic in a slightly different version, is Gilgul. 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 And Gilgul means to go around. So Chapin's song, All My Life's a Circle, is a story. It's a song about Gilgul. Does that make sense, everyone? So in a Western world, or in an Eastern communist world under kind of various forms of neo-Marxism, right, reality is a line. It's not just a Western idea, right? Half of Asia went communist, right? It's a big deal, right? So in a both Western materialistic paradigm, whether that Western materialistic paradigm is in the West or the East, or in a kind of, Chinese Maoist paradigm, right? The basic understanding of reality is linear. It's a linear reality. A line, the way it's understood simply, a line seems to have no depth, right? It has no interior. It's just a line, although a line does actually have depth and interior, but in its surface, that's the way line appears. The line is just driving forward. You can't go backwards, right? Once you've passed a point, you've passed it. It goes straight ahead, and it just doesn't go around. That's the nature of a line, right? And the line allows for great accomplishment. It allows us to thrust forward, right? It allows us to make quote unquote progress, the progress that Marx talked about and the progress that, John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham talked about in the West. So there's this sense of progress, sense of line. And then you come to the end of the line. That's called death. You die, you're at the end of the line. We're at the end of the line. It's over. So it's a linear progression, and then you come to the end of the line. That's the story that we live in. And that is a tragic story. And that is a false story. Right? And it is a violation. It is an abusive story, right? To raise a child, right, within the context of that story is abusive. And it abuses the fundamental knowing of the child. It robs from the child as educators, as parents, right? As teachers, it robs from the child their intuitive knowing. When Chapin sings, and I've got this funny feeling that we'll all be together again, whenever he sings at the place, I said the place goes wild because we know that. We have this sense So that's one. Two, it's an abusive story because it then posits a world that's fundamentally unjust. It's a world without justice. Does everyone get that? It's a world without justice. Why? Because, stay close, stay with me in the English, everybody. The Hebrew term's not going to help us now. Stay with me in the English, okay? It's unjust. Why is it unjust? Because it means that we live in a linear world, right, with a linear plot line, and you get to the end of the line, and it's very clear that within one lifetime, justice is not served for most human beings on planet Earth. Does that make sense, everyone? Does everyone get that sentence? Most human beings on planet Earth do not achieve, right, justice in one lifetime. That's two. Does that make sense, everyone? That's the second point. Point two. Good, everybody? Good? Three. Not only, and it's an abusive story for a third reason. It's abusive. Abuse means you violate the real. You violate the good. But it's abusive for a third reason, which is that within one lifetime, most people cannot realize the full purpose of their life. Does that make sense, everyone? Now you might say, hello, how do you know the full purpose of someone's life? The answer is, let me answer that question, right? Here's what we know. We know that we live in a context, an evolutionary context, right? An evolutionary context in which the story of evolution is transformation. Evolution is a series of transformations. And we know we live in an interior science context. All of the interior sciences across space and time share one notion. They share one fundamental notion, one perennial notion, which is that the telos, right, the purpose of Eros, the telerotic nature of reality, is transformation, right? That we move towards transformation. So both the interior and the exterior sciences understand reality as being about transformation. Now, let me just check with everyone here. We'll do a little empirical check-in, right? And I'm going to speak for a second to the people who are a little bit older, right? So anyone here who's, I don't know, let's make this up, above 60. I know we have all ages here. I understand. But let me just talk to, I apologize, our little above 60 contingent for a second, okay? And you don't have to respond to this if you don't want to identify your age. But how many people who are above 60 feel like you're going to complete your transformation fully in this lifetime? Does everyone get that? Right? Then no, you think you're going to complete your transformation in one lifetime? Yes, we're working on it. We should work on it. But actually, no chance. Look at your marriage. Look at how much freedom you have in it, how much freedom you don't. Right? Look at the things that you're still afraid to do. Look at the places you're afraid to place, right, and to stand fearlessly. Look at the parts of you that are actually haven't been fulfilled. Look at your lazinesses. Look at your, right? Does everyone get that? In other words, and as it's right, it's in one lifetime? No way, no chance, zero chance, right? Unless you're that kind of rarest soul that you're at the end of 10,000 lifetimes, you got one thing left. Right? But does that make sense, everyone? Does that make sense, everyone? If you actually check in, you probably realize, I'd love another lifetime to get a few things completed. And does that make sense? Who can feel that? Who can feel it? It's deep. It's deep. So in a world that's a loving world, so let's say the intention of the world, right, intrinsic to the structure of reality, the structure of reality is transformation. Okay? And so a loving world, right, says, wow, I know I'm going to go deep. I'm going to add a 0.4. Okay, I'm going to add 0.4. So there's a very deep notion in the lineage of Solomon, right? It was articulated in many ways, but there's a particular great master in Italy, Luzzatto, Moses Chaim Luzzatto, who articulates this in great depth in a book called Dat Tfunot, right? The Intimate Way of Wisdom, where he talks about lachma de kisufa in Aramaic, the bread of shame. What's the bread of shame? So the bread of shame is the Saving Private Ryan movie that we talked about a bunch of years ago. Remember, Tom Hanks 25 years ago makes a movie called Saving Private Ryan. And remember, it's about these several brothers who have already been killed. And this hypothetical, the Allied high command, right, takes on its kind of feminine self in the middle of World War II and says these 3 brothers or 4 brothers, I think, have been killed. There's one brother, Private Ryan, who's still fighting. Right, we're gonna send in our best troops to save Private Ryan and bring him back to his mother. It's this right strange and beautiful archetypal story. And Tom Hanks is the commander of these special troops, and most of the special troops that are sent to save Private Ryan are killed. Right, in this kind of mystical mission that makes no logistical sense in the middle of the war of saving Private Ryan. It's an incredible movie. And at the moment in which Tom Hanks is hit, he's hit by bullets. And he's in his last moments, he's sitting up against a big canister, and Private Ryan is by his side. And Tom Hanks says to him, he says, EARN, earn it. And the movie opens with, in the very beginning of the movie, with Private Ryan 50 years later coming to Tom Hanks's grave, right? And you see him reviewing his life. Did I earn it? Did I show up? Like, huh? So earn it means the following. A madly loving cosmos wants to gift me. The nature of the universal love story, the nature of the amorous cosmos, cosmos wants to gift me. Cosmos wants me to be full. Cosmos wants me to be in mad joy. Cosmos wants me to be delighted. Cosmos wants me to experience, right, all of the depth that I could possibly experience. The universe is not friendly only. The universe is welcoming, and the universe is madly loving. Now, in a madly loving cosmos, right, I've got to give you a gift that you can enjoy. So if I give you a gift you can't enjoy, does that make sense, everyone? Everyone with me? If I give you a gift you can't enjoy, I've given you a gift, but I'm getting power by giving you the gift, but you don't actually enjoy it. You don't experience it as yours, and you don't enjoy it the same way. Does that make sense so far? Am I making sense? Okay. So just imagine the following. Imagine that I invite you to this incredible dinner and I'm paying. Okay, Terry, I remember we had a great dinner once after one of our board conclaves and you paid for everyone's meal. What a beautiful thing to do, right? So, wow, Terry bought us all dinner. Right, so imagine I invite you to dinner and I prepare all the food. You don't have to do any work. Right? You come to dinner and you enjoy this incredible, fabulous, beautiful dinner. Huh? Does that work, everybody? So will you enjoy the dinner? Yeah, sure. It's fantastic. Great dinner. Awesome. That sounds good. Joseph was like, yeah, I'm in. Okay. Especially if Terry's paying, right? We're good. Okay. So yay. That makes perfect sense, right? That's one level of pleasure, one level of joy. But imagine that you're actually on this beautiful, stunning farm. And imagine you're growing the crops, right? And you are, creating the food over a period of a year. You're doing everything. You're raising all the elements of this beautiful, incredible vegan dinner that you're going to make for us, this 8-course vegan dinner. And you're growing all of the crops and all of greens and all of the different kinds of vegetables, right? And all of the fruits. And it's a vegan dinner with eggs, and all of the eggs, right? You're raising, right? You're preparing it all. And so you've prepared it all. You've run this incredible community, right? Raising all of this food, and you're now ready to gather in the food. And you've now had a successful crop and a successful, right? Your fruit trees and you're bringing everything together. And now the entire community gets together and everyone works together, and you make this incredible meal that everyone spent like a year earning, creating. And you sit down after a year of working together, right? Working hard and meeting the elements and meeting the challenges and going through an incredible amount of personal and social transformations in order to be able to work together and to make it all come together. And you've overcome so many obstacles, and now you're ready to eat. And you're going to eat that exact same meal. Does everyone get this? You're going to eat that exact same meal. Huh? Right? You're going to eat that exact same meal. And now you eat the meal. Do you get more pleasure from the meal that somebody bought you? Again, I'm all up for Terry. I'm going for a big dinner with you when you come here. Let's be clear. But actually, what we understand is that when we all work together, and we're all engaged in the process of transformation, the bread that we eat becomes ours. And when the bread is a free gift, given to us by Cosmos, right? That's called lachma de kisufa. That's called the bread of shame. Okay, so how do I earn it? How do I earn it? How do I make it mine? I make it mine through my unique journey of transformation. Does that make sense? Where my free will is at play. And that's the issue of free will and freedom is critical. And Lane and I just talked yesterday that it needs to be a universal love story, right? And it's why that's why we need to show that free will is core to Cosmos. And I'm in my story, and story's real, right? We're not living in a Yuval Harari world where the story's not real and value's not real. And Kathy Brownback and I are working together on this wonderful volume, putting together all of our work from this past year, critiquing Harari. So we'll have that as a ground volume so people can actually understand that this is the alternative we're critiquing. And we're using Yuval as a representative of the zeitgeist, which he is, the modern, postmodern zeitgeist. Right? You can't actually enjoy the meal. You can't actually get the pleasure of the meal unless it's not bread of shame. So if I love you madly, I'm going to give you the opportunity. If I am the infinite love, if I'm the infinite intimate, if I am the mad love force of Cosmos, I'm going to give you the capacity to earn it, to make the meal yours. And you can't earn it sufficiently. Almost no one can in one lifetime. We just know that. It's unjust. Right? Many people simply don't have the capacity. It's just not just to actually realize our fullest. There's all sorts of tragedies that happen in life. We die in childbirth, for example. Start there. But the tragedies go on and on, right? We live in a world in which bad things happen all the time, right? The tragic is part of life, right? And the move from the tragic to the post-tragic cannot be done unless we move from one dimension to the extra-dimensional. So the move from the tragic to what we've called the post-tragic, right? When I can cast out remorse, right? When I can actually begin to live in this joy, when everything I look upon is blessed, right? We're blessed by everything, and everything we look upon is blessed. That can't happen unless I have a wider field. Can't do it. Can't be done. Can't be done. There's got to be a wider field. There's got to be a wider field in which there's justice for all. There's truth and justice for all at some point. There's some weighing and balancing of the scales, right? Right, which can't be done within one dimension. There's not a balancing of the scales in one dimension. You cannot actually engage the world and actually even begin to understand and speak about justice if this world is all there is. It's very clear. So if you actually have a direct experience of goodness, of fairness, of justice, which is direct anthro-ontological experience, and we have cross-cultural studies, right, developmental studies that study one of the first experiences of children is a realization that the world should be fair. There's an enormous amount of studies on fairness. The world has to be fair. So it can't be fair in one lifetime. So you need multiple dimensions. Two, and this is our third point, our third point is that you can't achieve full transformation in one lifetime. It's a story that goes on. So I need actually more than one go around, right? I need more than one spin on the circle. I need more than one Gilgul. Right? I need to know that I'm going to reincarnate. And reincarnate means, this is number 4 now, reincarnate means that I actually have, and this is deep and beautiful, whenever you would talk to my wonderful Buddhist teacher friends as I was trying to bring the unique self teaching into the world, and they would say, Buddhism doesn't believe in unique self, which is the standard line of great Buddhist teachers. I'd say, you're lying. And they said, what do you mean you're lying? I would say, what about reincarnation? And they'd say, that's not a real Buddhist doctrine. And then I would cite them 30 places in which reincarnation got pretty strong in Buddhism from pretty central teachers. And what reincarnation means is that there's a unique life energy that transmigrates, that moves from world to world. That when we talk about what Barbara and I have called a continuity of consciousness, that continuity of consciousness is not a continuity, I talked a lot about this with my dear friend Barbara Marx Hubbard in the last 5 years of her life. It's not just a continuity of consciousness the way Barbara originally talked about it, right? Which is there's this general consciousness that goes on. No, there's a unique consciousness. There's a continuity of Barbara Marx Hubbard consciousness. And now that doesn't mean that Barbara Marx Hubbard is going to look like Barbara Marx Hubbard with a slightly different face in the next lifetime. It means something more subtle. We'll talk about that next week. But for now, it means that there's a quality of Barbara Marx Hubbardness, right, that actually, right, will continue and will continue its transformation. Does everyone get that? Right? That transformation, it's an ongoing story. The story's not over in this lifetime, meaning, right, it's not over when it's over. Did you get that? That's 4. But 5, here's 5. And the implication, the understanding of reincarnation is that in this lifetime, I'm not moving towards my death. I'm moving towards what I'm doing in this lifetime is I'm writing the story of my next incarnation. I am the author. I am the playwright of the next act in the play. It's not over in this lifetime, right? I am literally in this lifetime. I am writing the story. I'm writing the script of the next act. And it's not about do I achieve status and power. It's about do I impact? You get the difference? Do I impact? And impact takes place through my contribution to those in my unique circle of intimacy and influence. But impact also takes place to the degree that I'm able to sculpt and clarify the deepest expression of Dr. Kincaid, right, that exists in the world, KK, right? In other words, the deepest Lane Harrisonness that exists. Now, here's the thing. No one can call Lane out on that. No one can call Angus out on that, right? They are actually in the deepest, holy, sacred, creative competition with themselves. They're weightlifting. They're trying to push the highest weight they can. If I can use, I apologize for a masculine image there, although lots of female weightlifters, right? Sorry about that. But stay with me. It's a big deal, meaning I need to become the most Lane that I can become. Lane doesn't need to become Mark. Mark doesn't need to become Lane. Doesn't need to happen. But I need to become, there needs to be the most beloved KK that we can have in the world, the most Kathleen J we can have in the world, right? And to the precise extent that I don't exercise my free will. Does everyone get this? It's deep. To the precise extent that I don't exercise my free will is not, does my free will allow me to end the war in Ukraine? The war in Ukraine desperately needs to end, for sure. Utterly necessary. And we should do everything we can, right, to participate in that. I'm actually looking forward to Lena giving a talk about what's going on in Ukraine sometime in the next few months, right? And things are happening, changing every day there now. It's a critical moment where Ukraine needs to be rearmed because the armaments from Biden are about to give out. And it's a critical moral imperative to rearm Ukraine right now. But that's a different conversation. Bracket that conversation. My free will means within the circumstance of my life, as I am confronted with competing possibilities, I have an interior capacity, right, to choose. And we'll do, right, sometime in these weeks, as part of reincarnation, we'll do a week or two on freedom and free will and the first principle and first value of freedom, which is, if you remember, those of you who were with us both in One Mountain a couple of times and at the Mystery School, freedom is one of the 10 elements of story, which is a structure of cosmos. Right? Freedom, I have freedom. But my freedom means within the context of my unique life, after I take into account all of the constraining factors, all of the things that prevent my freedom, my age, my height, my socioeconomic background, my genetic structure, my proclivities, my dispositions, all the things that might prevent my freedom, after I take all of those into account, and I honor all of those antecedent causation factors, there's still an originality in me, a divinity in me, an eros value in me, an unmoved mover, right? A subject in me, right? I'm not just an object that's acted upon by external causes. I'm a subject, from my subjectivity, I choose. So that dimension of choice clarifies my essence. The clarification of my essence, that transformation, right? Clarification through transformation, where I become the most beautiful, gorgeous, true, good, wondrous, poetic, prose version of myself. That is the purpose of my life, that transformation. That transformation does not complete in one lifetime. And because the world, the universe loves me madly, the personhood, the infinite, intimate person of cosmos loves me madly, so it is actually an axiom. It's an axiom of cosmos that there should be reincarnation. Does everyone get that? Everyone get what just happened? It's like, who got that? That's big. That's huge. That's big. That's huge. Okay, it's very deep. It's very, very, very deep. It's very deep. Okay, it's like deep. Now let's just go slow. Okay, just go slow. Let's go slow. So there's this sense of a circle. There's a line, right? There's a circle. I go round and round. but I don't go round and round in the sense of an endless circle where I'm doing recursive loops, right? What I do is, and it's very precise, right? It's not exactly that I pick up, right, from where I left off. That's not exactly right. It's more precise. It's that, so for example, let's say from one incarnation to the next, right, in the deep interior sciences, I don't have the weakness in this new incarnation that I had in the last incarnation, right? Who wrote that earlier? Who's that? Marilyn. You got that, love? Right? I don't have, and I call everyone love. Boy, girl, trees, animals, everyone loves. So no offense intended. I call everyone love. So I hope that's okay. But if not, I apologize. So it's not that I pick up from where I left off, not exactly, although I understand what you're pointing to, and you're right. It's more, so let's say if I had a proclivity towards alcohol, I'm just saying, I'm having too many cocktails at the end of the day, right? 6 is too much, okay? So it's not, okay, now I'm in the next lifetime, I still have that same proclivity to alcohol. I pick up where I left off. That in the interior sciences is not the case. Does everyone get that? It's slightly different, okay? It's more like in the last life, right? I write the script for the next life, and there are particular dynamics or dimensions in my interiority and my unique configuration of intimacy that can be transformed and evolved. Right. And what there is continuity is those dynamics, those interior psychological, psycho-spiritual, existential, mystical dynamics, right, in the structure of my intimacy, those, right, are re-experienced in the next lifetime. Does that make sense? So it may appear in different guises. And we'll talk about in the coming weeks, right? Is it just, do I stay in the same gender? Can I reincarnate as an animal? Or what does that even mean? Who knows? There's a lot to talk about here about how reincarnation works. But here's the point. If you notice, I didn't tell any stories yet. I didn't cite any empirical studies. Let's talk about Gilgul, right? The line that becomes a circle that actually creates a continuity of consciousness that spirals, right, towards, right, wholeness. And I'm in a perpetual process of becoming more whole, right? And I am always earning it. So I actually move beyond shame. So let me say it this way. Reincarnation is axiomatic to a just cosmos. It's axiomatic to a cosmos of mad love. It's axiomatic to a cosmos of transformation, right? It's structural to cosmos itself, even before I've begun to talk about any specific instance, any information, any empirical information. We'll talk about empirical information. Right, we'll talk about that. And there's an enormous amount to say. And next week, we're going to tell stories. I want to tell maybe 4 or 5 reincarnation stories next week and interpret them. But let's just, for now, right, understand that actually reincarnation is this entirely new experience. And I want to just say, well, let's hold it here. Let's hold it here. That's enough. That's enough for the first week, right? That's enough for the first week. This is wildly important. There's an enormous amount of implications, right, for this and every relationships, vocation, joy, right, everything. The implications are unimaginable. We've just begun this conversation, and this is essential to our experience of Homo Amor. Homo Amor cannot experience themselves as a separate self in one lifetime. It's a much wider field. Oh my God. So I turn my work to Krista. What a crazy delight.
Thank you, Dr. Marc Gafni. That was incredible, amazing, deep, holy, beautiful. The chat box was exploding with yeses, and oh my God, that was so beautiful. Thank you. Let's just breathe that in for a moment to just feel that we're actually here together in ceremony, I want to say. Like, we're receiving the Dharma, we're receiving this incredible transmission of what is actually possible in this lifetime and in the next, what is possible intergalactically, what is possible interdimensionally. And we're actually birthing new possibility here together in this ceremony. And I want to spend a moment to feel what our personal responsibility is in that, because we get to come here every week. We get to drink from this beautiful new story of value that fills us with hope. At least I feel right now, wow, ecstatic, whoa, hopeful, amazing, beautiful. And then the question is, what can I do with this in my life tomorrow, today, tonight, in this next coming week? And so maybe after, when we close here, you can sit for a moment with yourself and write down your key insights or your key phrases of the Dharma that's touched you the most, just to bring it down and bring it on paper and reflect on it and write on it a little bit, to bring it into your life already. And then you can also ask yourself the question, how can I show up in my life this week knowing what I know now? How do I want to bring this into my life? And that way we can all start to embody and enact Homo Amor in our unique corner of the world. And we want to support each other by doing that because we created this beautiful community platform. Eli has done an amazing job building this beautiful space for us where we can actually be in digital intimacy together, where we can deepen our relationship together. Because David, I loved your question in the beginning in the chat box. You asked, like, how am I going to hold all of this? It's, wow, so much, so beautiful, but how do I hold this? And so the answer is what we all responded also in the chat. You're not alone. We get to hold this together, and we get to hold each other in holding this and in becoming this and in being that transformation that Marc evoked so beautifully today. So we do that by coming to that community platform, and there's actually a beautiful area that everyone can join for free. So you can make your profile there, you can write a little bio about yourself, you can see all the other members that are on the platform, you can even see who is close to you, who's near you. As we're growing, we'll be able to find people in our cities, and we can meet each other locally or even hang out every week locally while we're joining One Mountain together online. So there's beautiful features on the platform. Also, of course, you get the invitation to here to One Mountain every week, and we post the replay there. And as you all know, probably, we also create a beautiful edited transcript from the weekly teachings that we also publish on Substack, but we also publish it here on the platform. So that is a beautiful way that you can slow down with every sentence that was spoken today. Like I always say, when we're editing the teachings of Marc Gafni, when you're seeing it on paper and you're reading it, it's like, wow, is that actually what he said? Every sentence is alive, and there's so much beauty in that. So I want to really recommend spend some time this week to really study it and deepen it with yourself. So you can do that on the free platform.